Before we get into today's video, please quickly check to see if you're subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our stories. Star-wide war against the Mandarin had stayed where it had begun, in the stars. Humans left Earth on their many ships, the war wave crashing against the Mandarin like a cargo truck running through an ice cream shop, and the battle was contained as best as it could be. This kept the war far away on other planets, the other races of the stars battling alongside the humans against this common enemy. Earth was considered by many the safest place any race of the stars could be. The orbital stations around the moon, the many star docks with their ships floating above the big blue and white pearl, artillery intercession rings constantly rotating around it. Earth was the stronghold of humanity's might. On the planet below, they even trained the citizens of the Central Confederation, forging them into something stronger, better, deadlier than what could be achieved back on their home worlds. The air, sun, minerals, food, gravity, and Earth itself reshaped these odd peoples into something only humans could truly appreciate. The Mandarin figured that out as well. The problem wasn't just the humans. It was the damnable death world they came from. They had assaulted and invaded dozens of other planets, and their game plan was the same as it always was. They would land in number, quickly take over the orbital defense systems of the planet, overrun what little military there was, and that was that. Earth would fall, as all the others have. Miss Rimmicky had just sat down after a long time working on her standing desk. Sitting down as often as she did was not good for her, let alone anyone, and Caden had gotten her a desk that instead allowed her to stand as she worked. Miss Rimmicky was a Zumra, a four-eyed draconic race that hailed from a planet that was not particularly happy with humans at the current moment. The Zumra were lauded for their beauty and attractive features, and were renowned for their fantastical appearance, all the way from their long head fronds to their strong, dragon-like feet. Miss Rimmicky, like other Zumra, liked humans nearly as much as they liked them, and had been a part of the first group of defectors to ignore the demands of their leadership. Now she taught other star citizens about human culture, as well as co-head a pro-human political movement that currently operated in the shadows. The big-mouthed bass had just finished a quick loop around a few planets, checking for raiders and dealing with the whole Stadici issue that had suddenly cropped up. She had not planned for the Stadici being included in her agenda, and the highly toxic star race was now causing problems for both her movement and the Confederation at large. She could not really be mad at them, as they were a lonely race that just found out that humans were the only ones who were immune to their toxins. They had been shut away on their planet for hundreds of years and were so regulated that many people did not even know what they looked like under their filter veils, suits, or masks. The Stadici could now show themselves openly to another race without fear, and they were still intoxicated by the thrill of it. Miss Rimmicky had been busy all morning reading reports from her spies on the big-mouthed bass, and thankfully there had been no fatalities. Near the end of the ship's patrol, several Stadici had smuggled themselves on board in crates of chips, nearly causing several fatalities, and were now being held on Earth in null cells. The big-mouthed bass was in orbit, getting a full deep clean in order to make sure none of the toxin was left on board, as the last thing they needed was a call to battle stations and someone dying en route to Stadici toxin. Her personal communicator trilled, and she tapped the black band on her wrist. "Rimmicky," she said politely, still tapping away on her main data tablet as she curled up with a blanket.
"Statizi, again!"
Mr. Radisson barked into her ear, and she squinted 2 of her 4 eyes.
"They delayed an entire battleship, a big one. They're scrubbing every inch of the deck clean. It's going to be here for weeks."
Mr. Radisson was a Point, a shorter, multicolored race of peoples from Pillin 4. Despite being a slender, athletic race that held deeply colored pupilless eyes, they had pointed ears and shared many features of the humans, such as the shape of their hands and feet. They were, however, notched as elvish to the humans, and they still chafed under the identifier. Miss Rimmicky sighed, both at having Radisson barking in her ear and because her human lover, Caden, was not going to be home for another 3 hours. Radisson, we can't predict everything, despite our best efforts, and don't be so hard on the Stadisi. They're just lonely.
Lonely?
Radisson yelled, and she could actually hear him waving his hands around.
They're walking plagues! What if one of them accidentally got loose on board the ship? They would have wiped out all of our hard work with the Yorpals, the Jinn, the Rowan. What if they had killed Freyrin? It would have set us back years!
Yorpals were a semi-bestial race of aliens that hailed from Dagmar Prime. Their people were one of snouts and paws, and were a fussy race with many cultural norms that made both Miss Rimmickie's and Mr. Radisson's job rather hard. The Jinn were a four-armed, angular-headed race that had been nearly destroyed completely during the war against the Daramir. They were marked by the many masks they wore, hiding their faces as per their own customs. Then there were the Rowan, an extremely poor star race that humans had forced into the Confederation by paying their fees and dues on behalf of the Rowan people. Rowans were a charming race as far as the children of the stars went. They had long, wide ears off the side of the head like the Prill, but they had full heads of hair. Their hair was long, curly, and vibrantly colored, while their skin were shades of yellow, ranging from light buttermilk to a dusky gold. Miss Rimmicky sighed out her draconic nostrils as Radisson continued to rave into her short, jagged ears. She let him go on for a few more seconds before clicking her teeth. Radisson, I know they caused a fair bit of stress, but it is nothing to lose your head over. The ship and a few others like her will be back out into the stars in no time. Besides, the human war wave is doing well at pushing the Mandarin back towards the first planets they took. All is going to be well.
What?
Mr. Radisson's voice came back, though it was hissed and a little garbled. Radisson, Rimmicky asked, giving her wrist a shake. Can you hear me?
You...
Came back through the earpiece, and Miss Rimmicky plucked it from her ear, giving it a shake. What is going on with this thing? She rumbled at it, even though it looked perfectly fine. Her fronds twitched out as an alert split across her data tablet, the sound so loud it vibrated aggressively in her hand. Miss Rimmicky's blood ran cold as she saw the words play across the screen. Anomaly detected. Seek shelter now. The attack had been sudden, and Freyrin had been staring at it the entire time it happened. She could see herself in the window reflection, pink eyes staring in horror, as a void crackled to life out in the dead expanse of space. Black lightning edged in white broke the calm, flashing brilliantly and even shedding light onto her mustard yellow fur. Ships, thousands of ships, poured from the rift, Mandarin cutters, world breakers. It seemed every ship they had came flooding out of that rip in reality, glittering with their window lights and cannons already flashing to life. Freyrin had never seen such a sight before, let alone gotten to see the orbital defensive rings come to life. Human Quasimodo Mark III hullbreaker cannons swiveled around, even the ones of the station she was docked at, and started firing, shattering the void with their revolving munitions. It was like someone had kicked an earthen beehive, thousands of human, Yorpal, Rowan, and Point ships jerking to life and spinning around to face the sudden appearance of their enemy. She watched the fourth Worldbreaker battleship pull itself out of the void like a hungry creature, scenting prey, when the entire deck began to rattle with alarms. Battle stations! All crew to battle stations! The call came out over the ship's comms, breaking Freyrin from the sight of fighter swarms pouring out of more hangars than she could count. Undocking in 10 minutes! Freyrin! Himmel screamed, skittering down the hallway. We need to suit up! Freren spun around. For what? All the damn pods are in decon.
Well, we gotta do something! Come on!
Himmel screamed as the World Breakers began launching their raiding barges, the long-prowed assault landers screaming with all their speed towards the surface of Earth. Others peeled away, their noses glowing red as they prepared their boarding prows. Freren ran after Himmel, soon joined by Zetrin, a cobra-headed Carlagan who still held a bag of pet supplies for his ferret in his clawed hands.
What's going on?
Zetrin hissed out as he started running with them.
Where did all these damn ships come from?
Freren shook her head as they ran around the corner towards the barracks and armory, filtering in with the hundreds of other infantry who were scrambling to get war ready. I have no idea! How did the Mandarin even get this far across the fucking Confederation? Freren, Himmel, and Zetrin ran into the heavy assault drop trooper armory, crawling into their underlayer suits and carapaces of heavy armor. Yorpals, Jin, Point, Rowan, and Carlagans, under similar job descriptions, were doing the same, though they looked as unsure as the rest of the infantry. Corporal, how are we even going to get down there? A female Point cried out, jamming her helmet on over her vibrant teal hair.
We don't have any pods!
Freren slammed her helmet over her own head, her ears tilting back into place via muscle memory, and she keyed up Sergeant Mackey. Sergeant! How the fuck are we getting down to the surface?
Working on it.
Sergeant Mackey yelled into her ears, and she looked over, seeing him, a staff sergeant, and a lieutenant working furiously over a comms relay, its many screens glittering with a multitude of tracking dots.
There's a delivery of birds I'm trying to get over here to take us down. It's our only option at this point, and they are unlocking from their transport carriers.
All hands, Marines to the starboard level decks. Prepare to repel boarders.
Freren looked around at everyone else as she tapped into a camera feed, the Marines hauling ass across their own armory barracks. The Marines on board wore flash gear, an odd mix of heavy upper armor and lighter skid armor, designed to protect against shipborne munitions punching through and throwing shrapnel around. Their armor was always black, white, and trimmed with gold, a nod to the ancient dress uniform they still wore to this day.
We need to go over there and help them!
Himmel said into Freren's ear as he racked his XC-1 Lancer rifle.
We can't just wait here!
Freren reached over and grabbed his olive drab shoulder armor. The Marines can handle themselves. They have their job, we have ours. Sergeant, any word?
Kestrels and vultures are inbound.
Sergeant Mackey said, and everyone got a ping in their helmets.
They're landing in the hundreds of thousands down there, and units are scrambling. Everyone to the hangars, now. Light infantry, seal your fucking helmets or put on suits. We're going down in the open. In the open?
A male red-furred Yorpal called out.
Exposed to space?
Get your helmets on and tailbags secured! Freren bellowed, her own suit doing a ready check and showing her 100% sealed in. Time to ride the vacuum, lads! Sergeant Mackey looked around and saw that nearly all of his NCOs were still down on Earth. Why else wouldn't they be? They were on open leave. He turned around in a circle, the T-visor to his helmet searching. Then, it fell on Freren, standing there amongst the Yorpal and Point that were getting their own helmets on. He stared at Freren for a long time, and Freren stared at him back, her tail wagging briefly from nerves around the suit seal. Humans were dead clever with their suits. Not even furred tails could break their void seals when a limb bag was put in place and the fabric shrunk down around it. Sergeant Mackey stood stock still for 3 more heartbeats, then spun around.
LT.
Their lieutenant turned, his gold-rimmed T-visor looking at Sergeant Mackey. Then, they both looked over to Freren.
It's time, sir. We have no choice now. We're going to be doing the riskiest maneuver known to the Drop Corps, and I need NCOs.
Sergeant Mackey said.
Boss lady will understand. Let's hope she doesn't fry our brains for this, Staff Sergeant.
The lieutenant said, then nodded to Mackey as he quickly pulled a data slate off of his armor and rapidly typed into it. Words began to trickle across Freren's visor screen, and she stared at them wide-eyed. Corporal Freren Battlefield Promotion, Section 12, Article 91 of UAS Infantry Battlefield Promotion Protocols. Sergeant Freren is now on deck. Iron and steel. Freren's stomach fluttered as more information gathered on her screen. Several Yorpal, Poit, and Karlaken had just been promoted to corporals, and Freren now led a small troop of multiple fire teams, a mix of all races, including humans. Oh shit! Freren breathed out as her communications were upgraded on the spot.
Birds are here. Let's go.
Staff Sergeant Mackey called out, pushing Freren forwards.
Go, go, go. Get ready for the release.
Showing green on all present personnel seals in the drop bay. Emergency purge in progress. Going amber on all hangar doors.
The Dogmaster called out into all their helmets, and Freren could hear the report of rifles and pistols in the background. Were they trying to assault the damn control center of the ship? The hangars became deeply chilly as the air was sucked into the ship. Then the hangar doors opened out into the void. Their boots were still lightly magnetic, which aided in walking a little bit. And they all moved towards the now rapidly landing Kestrel and Vulture aircraft. Vultures were far larger than Kestrels, designed for landing a bulk amount of troops, while their area defense weapons mounted along the hull laid down suppressive fire. They had double the engines of the smaller Kestrels and had 4 pilots instead of 2. Despite being so large, they still had some semblance of agility. The same way a whale does to a dolphin, maybe.
Link into the passenger oxygen supply. There are swivel tubes along the overhead.
A pilot called out to them as Freren and her platoon scrambled on board the nearest Vulture. Dozens of the crafts were now landing, filling the huge hangar like a fussy cloister of birds. Freren reached up and sunk the head of a tube into the connection slot on her helmet. Her helmet's emergency oxygen reset and showed her green to breathe. She got down behind the dual-mounted door guns on the Vulture, a pair of rugged-looking M2s with their usual barrels and brakes. That's when she noticed how loud her breathing was. She had first thought it was the engines of the Vulture, but she was in space now. Her breathing was so loud amongst the quiet that it was the only thing reaching her ears. The sudden, crushing acknowledgement of the silence made her brain panic, the lack of noise nearly claustrophobic. They all braced themselves as the Vulture spun around, its 4 engine clusters tilting and swiveling for the right angle. Then it dipped its pointed nose out towards the chaos of space. When they cleared the door and immediately hooked around towards Earth, Freren stared wide-eyed past the gun mount. The glittering manic flashes of cannons, of fighters dancing to the death within the ebbing dark of space, glowing blue with the light of Earth. It was breathtaking. It was as if the human god of death was painting with a brush of watercolors out onto the black canvas of space. Bright blooms of ships exploding into yellows and whites, drives combusting into streaks of green and blue, the flicker of Mandarin munitions with their many purples and oranges, and the flashes of white from the Quasimodo Mark III cannons battering Mandarin ships to piles of meat-filled scrap. All those colors, all that movement, yet no sound. All she could hear was the rush of her own breathing, the rustle of her uniform, the strain of her muscles. As she held herself in place, destroyers were peeling away from the station even now, their guns swiveling and erupting to life as they took on Mandarin assault corvettes at near point-blank ranges, their guns throwing shadows across the armored hulls. Swallow-winged Boeing IZ-10 bombers cruised over the hulls of Mandarin gunboats, dropping payloads that ripped armor away like the shells of a tasty meal. Battleships and heavy cruisers faced each other like packs of stubborn beasts, pummeling each other at ranges so close the captains could likely lean out and give each other the finger. Yorpal, Poit, and other ships of the Confederation ducked and dove through the human war vessels, taking shots where they could and doing their damnedest to avoid getting hit. A Jin Lancer powered on its ramming shields, the tip of the spear-like ship glowing yellow as it punched through a Mandarin corvette, splitting the arrogant ship in two like human sea battles of old. It was madness.
Sergeant, guns up.
The pilot called out to her.
We have fighters inbound. Point defense turrets are active.
Copy, Freren said, moving soundlessly as she swiveled the 2-gear M2 heavy machine guns. Private Shasti, Trimble, Arcus, get your MGs over here. Everyone else, hang on. The male blue Yorpal stood beside Freren, hefting his XC-1MG up as the control arm whirred noiselessly within the void. Freren pulled back on the charging handles of the M2s, only the vibration felt in her hands marking their passing.
Oh, to be a void gunner, sitting on the edge of oblivion with my barrel to the stars.
Shasti murmured to himself, while all around them, the other Yorpals took cover as Trimble and Arcus took up their own positions along the open flank of the Vulture. Trimble, a point, was shaking, his muscles quivering as he watched a large flock of Mandarin fighters make a mad dash away from human and Jinn fighters who quickly took up pursuit. Arcus, a massive female Jinn with a mask carved like a grinning earthen bear, stood ready and firm, already tracking her own target. Watching the forms of the fighters twirl and dive soundlessly through streams of mute tracer rounds was terrifying. Worse so due to Freren only being able to hear her hammering heart and rushed breathing. There must have been 50 or 60 aircraft all making their way towards Earth, the Vultures and Kestrels looking like a flock of metal birds bristling with weapons. The point defenses on all the Vultures opened up, so Freren did the same. The bright, silent cones of light spat out by the gunners next to her were nearly blinding, and her T-visor dimmed slightly to compensate. She herself held down the trigger on the weapon system, the M2s thundering and thudding soundlessly toward the fighters. Freren heard nothing, only feeling the recoil of the M2s shaking her arms and the frame of the Vulture. The spent brass floated and tumbled around her, as if they were in slow motion, cartwheeling past her shoulders or out into the open void. The shuddering inhale and exhale of her mouth was the only song her body sang, her tail hanging in a smooth river behind her, as she swiveled the turret from left to right, tracking a Mandarin fighter and cleaving holes into it like a cannon to a car door. She hoped none of the rounds hit anyone friendly, a thought that occurred to her as tracer rounds zipped overhead from a human fighter. A Kestrel wobbled and started to spin nearby, having caught rounds from one of the Mandarin fighters. Another Vulture shuddered, one of its engines cartwheeling off towards the station and impacting against the bulkhead of a cargo freighter. The legion of transport aircraft now took evasive maneuvers, weaving and ducking around other smaller ships that now sought to close the window and screen the landing craft.
We're clear,
The pilot said coolly, as 7 human gunboats formed a literal wall, their own point defense systems howling soundlessly into the fighters, still trying to get to the Kestrels and Vultures.
We've managed to stay on orbital target as well.
We need to turn around for re-entry burn.
Another pilot spoke.
We all need to do it now and start burning, or else we're going to cook and be off target.
Freren was still thudding away with the turret as she listened, still catching a few fighters that tried to duck under the gunboats. It was kind of neat having the sergeant comms.
We'll have enough fuel to touch down, but after that, we'll have nothing but fumes.
A female pilot said, as all the Kestrels and Vultures swiveled around.
Everyone have their drag chutes?
Their own pilot spoke up, and the feeling of the Vulture turning around nearly made Freren sick.
Both stages armed. At Mach 10, we'll push out the grappler chute and start our burn once we get closer to re-entry. At Mach 3, we'll deploy the chugger chute and push our engines to full. We should enter nice and slow.
Engines are going to be cooked to shit. There's a reason why we only do this as an emergency action.
Another pilot spoke up, and Freren was astounded at how at ease they all sounded, even as they plummeted towards Earth backwards. There was a fair bit of chuckling over the comms, then a little bit of chatter between Staff Sergeant Mackey and his pilot. They talked for a fair bit before her own pilot spoke up.
Stop burning, folks. Time to make history.
He said, as the Vulture began to vibrate, as all the engines were pushed to their max power to slow the craft down.
Over 100 birds coming in backwards for re-entry. Going to be one for the books.
Freren shrunk away from the doors, shocked to hear that so many craft were doing this at once, and the entire platoon sank back further in towards the passenger area. Freren could see the massive engines of the Vultures and the brightly glowing Ashburn slick-jet Corsair engines of the Kestrels.
Is this even going to be enough?
A Kestrel pilot said, and Freren could hear the shuddering of their pressurized cockpits through her mic.
Gonna have to be.
Her Vulture pilot said. Then the craft gave a lurch.
Deploy grapplers.
Huge, fin drag chutes made of alloys and ceramics shot out from the tops of the crafts, grabbing the lighter layers of atmosphere as the engines flared with every ounce of power they had.
We are too fast still!
Another Vulture pilot said, Freren's body jittering and shaking noiselessly in the passenger compartment.
We need to lose more speed or they're going to cook! We need to burn them up! We'll run out of fuel!
The Kestrel pilot shouted.
What do you want us to do? Land with our emergency chutes?
Our only job is to get these people to the ground. Dallas is getting swarmed.
Freren's Vulture pilot said, and the craft was shaking violently now.
Hit your ACAGs now and watch your G-meters. The bubble won't last for long.
The engines flared even brighter as Freren watched them, holding her troopers to her as they all cried or screamed soundlessly in their own helmets. The Vultures and Kestrels began dumping Jin Omorgira fuel into the experimental ACAG devices with their engines, increasing their power output by nearly 200% and forming a curved blue shield-looking bubble below their craft. These were supposed to be used for only a minute, if not just a couple of seconds, but the pilots kept their engines fully engaged for nearly 5 minutes of re-entry. This Omorgira bubble was not only keeping their passengers alive, but also keeping them from turning into metal fireballs.
Chugger shoots.
Her pilot called out, and she watched the grapples detach, cartwheeling off as a larger, softer chute deployed. Freren felt this one far more than the others, and she withstood the force pulling at her body. His voice came back.
Angle engines and keep burning. We're all going to be out of fuel by the time we get clear.
I don't remember it being this hard getting up here.
Another pilot said, her voice huskier and lightly chuckling.
That's because we were shot up here in a ship. These damn things were supposed to be delivered to Martisi.
A pilot piped up, and they all began to laugh. Freren didn't like it when they laughed.
Wish we had fucking heat shields.
Her pilot muttered.
Having to rely on pure engine power, alien fuel magic, and a bunch of drag chutes is not what I would call fun. Everyone's passenger still showing green.
A Kestrel pilot spoke up.
Mine got a little warm, but they're all right. We need to ask for doors or something, or some kind of shielding along the bottom of these birds. The Jinn have a bigger shield generator thing, don't they?
Freren tilted her head, her helmet's T-visor glowing blue as she looked out over Earth. They were at the clouds, and she gave a short laugh, able to finally hear the Vulture creaking and shaking. The engines must have been absolutely worn out from how they sounded. And even now they managed small micro-movements to keep the craft steady.
My armor is cooked, my engines are cooked. We sure as hell can't sell these birds now.
A Vulture pilot laughed out.
I have 5 minutes of fuel. What about you guys?
1 minute.
I'm out. Deploying emergency chutes.
I still have 5 minutes. Elmo has a T-Rex and a Go Fish card.
Freren's pilot gave a short bark of laughter, then spoke.
I have 2 minutes of fuel. Going by my readings will come floating down in the middle of the Dallas defense zone. Prepare to act as infantry, people.
Up! Freren called out, getting roughly to her feet as the Vultures and Kestrels started to spin around, their hulls blackened and a kind of unwelcomely rattly. On your feet! Look at the doors! Freren poked her head out with her platoon to the unfurling slugfest below. Civilians were standing shoulder to shoulder with active military and reserve units, wearing their own armor and taking lead to Mandarin raiders. The Mandarin were elven-looking, much like the Point, except that they were over 6 feet tall, dark of skin tone, and had eyes as red as freshly spilled human blood. Despite this, they had fur-tufted tails much like the Nimiki, which were clearly not helping them in the melee. Not only had their assault failed, they were being pushed back by the combined might of armed human civilians. A privately owned M6 linebacker, considered an antique by modern standards, shattered a landing cutter from the skies, pumping 25mm chain gun rounds into it as the APC bristled with Mandarin anti-armor spikes. An M1126 Stryker infantry carrier vehicle, painted up as the mascot for what was clearly a college sorority, was deploying a small squad of blonde-headed female humans into the fray, all of them wearing matching plate carriers.
Eyes on!
Freren called out, scrambling behind the M2 turret while her machine gunners took their places.
Covering fire for the squad by that Kroger!
The crafts that were out of fuel deployed their landing chutes, a safety feature that, while allowing the craft to land safely, was going to both ruin the airframe and treat the troopers inside like bouncing jelly beans. Her own pilots were desperately operating the engines, both slowing them down for landing and trying to get it to fit in the parking lot below them. The Vulture wobbled, creaked, groaned, and shuddered like a drunken goose trying to walk through a ball pit. And Freren's stomach was deeply not a fan of the movements. Freren brought the M2s to life again, this time able to enjoy the vengeful thunder of their barrels as she traced it along the cover of the Mandarin, chewing apart concrete and cars alike. The booming roar of the XC-1MGs next to her would have been deafening if it wasn't for her helmet, but the long streams of munitions ripped through the charging Mandarin like they were made of paper. The Vulture came down at a sluggish angle, smashing onto 3 large trucks and a delivery van with a knee-quaking buckle of the airframe. Freren and nearly half of her platoon were thrown from the craft as it twisted, but they were on their feet before the engines could gutter out their last little cough of flame. The pilots came rolling out of their cockpits, wheeling submachine guns, as the rest of her platoon came fanning out from the craft, XC-1 Lancer rifles ripping a heavy toll amongst the now retreating Mandarin. Freren ran up to an odd-looking human wearing a cowboy hat, spurred boots, and a rather elaborate plate carrier that held a radio he was angrily yelling into. She grabbed him by the shoulder strap and pulled the giant of a man down towards her.
What are we looking at?
4 brigades are attempting to hold an LZ.
He shouted, bending further down to Freren as he was quite a few inches taller.
Militia are holding a ring, but we need proper forces. They keep getting landers in and we are at a deadlock.
They're coming!
Freren yelled, then pointed up. The man looked up and saw waves of vultures and kestrels floating down on their emergency chutes, while one kestrel landed on top of a Buc-ee's, bowling over their animal mascot and slamming through the roof of the rest station.
What the fuck?
He said in alarm as another vulture smashed down onto a dairy trailer, causing an explosion of milk that showered over multiple squads of militia and light infantry regulars. The vulture gave a groan and slammed nose first into the ground, light infantry spilling out of it like a poked nest of spiders.
Long story,
Freren said, then pointed towards a barricade.
Get your men over there and follow us in. Make sure nothing gets behind us.
You got it, Warhound.
The man said cheekily, then took off at a jingling run. Freren stood there, smiling as she watched him go, then waved her hand.
All right, we got a fight to win and Mandarin to kill. Let's go!
The Mandarin were used to assaulting other planets. Civilians ran, military fought, sacrifices were taken, victory was had. The humans proved difficult and formidable opponents to be sure, but their planet was like any other, and their war wave was still fighting them in Mandarin-held space. This, to the Mandarin, meant their planet was lightly guarded, and its location was divined by their many priests via the sacrifice of thousands of prisoners. With its location found via their odd, sorcerous means, they launched a lightning assault to take the world. But there was one thing they did not know. Earth had a shitload of guns. Indeed, the Mandarin did not know that. In the unified American states especially, gun ownership was at the peak of popularity. Some civilians even bought proper combat armor and combat-ready weapons just in case. And the after-combat smug was so thick it could have been spread on lava rocks. While the Mandarin had more success in some areas of the European coalition, they hit dead-end roadblocks in the UAS, even more so now that Canada and South America had joined in. The surviving Mandarin would, frankly, see Africa and Australia as nightmare fuel for decades to come. Despite their early success in their landings, they knew it was going to be a hard fight in the skies. They had assumed their forces could take the ground, and in thus take control of the ground-based orbital defense arrays. But that proved far harder than they had believed. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, Arizona, Florida, and Montana proved to be mass graves for the Mandarin who landed there in force. The local populations, armed to the gills and having to suppress their now fully erect, gender-specific murder boners, slammed into the Mandarin from every direction. Every house, every gas station, every shopping mall turned into a suddenly bristling hive of warriors that poured in from every direction. The death toll was high on both sides, but the Mandarin took the lion's share of deaths. Over 700 million combat-capable Mandarin had made successful landfall on Earth. Only 7 million managed to escape after 3 days of constant, brutal combat actions, another further million taken as prisoners of war. The death toll was so steep for the shocked Mandarin that it crippled an entire combat wing of their empire, including the loss of over 50% of their war fleet and hundreds of noble houses who sought to gain bragging rights for conquering Earth. As the Mandarin fled back through their odd portals with the remnants of their combat group, Earth smoked for weeks on end. Wreckage of combat ships floated aimlessly around Earth or made landfall, hurtling through the atmosphere in balls of flame. Cities, towns, they all trailed tendrils of black smoke for days as the dead were tallied and the fallen were buried. The dead Mandarin were so numerous that they could not dig holes fast enough, so instead, the humans resorted to mass graves. They covered the once invaders with the soil of the planet that they had failed to even get a foothold on, their legacy swallowed to be broken down into nutrients to feed the land itself. The death toll of humanity was still high, and the Mandarin had left their mark. Hundreds of millions of civilians had died, hundreds of thousands of military personnel slain during combat. But the humans licked their thumbs and still marked the page in history as a crushing victory. The Jinn, Rowan, Poit, Opticans, and Karlakans arrived in force to relieve the humans, but were shocked to find the humans merely licking their wounds. They did not arrive to a planet under siege, but a tomb world for Mandarin pride. Despite arriving to not find an enemy, the citizens of the stars took to providing medical aid for the billions of wounded, engineers set to the task of repairing ships, and food supplies poured in from all planets that could manage it. The Nimiki, a two-toed, long-footed race of the stars, known for their long horizontal ears, fully colored eyes with light-colored pupils, and their odd tails that were long, agile, and adorned at the end with a furred tuft, also arrived as quickly as they could. They brought with them enough food to feed Earth 3 times over, as it was all they could do in relation to the war effort. The humans had taken care of these planets and their people for years now, bleeding for them all across the dark void of space. Humans may have been the butcherers of the stars, but they were their butcherers, and they came without being bidden. Other rogue Yorpal and Zumra came as well, but the lack of attention from the Yorpal and Zumra proper did not go unnoticed. A celebration was had when the big-mouth bass relit its engines, having played host to a battle as fierce as that down on Earth, and it hauled itself back to the rather busy repair docks under its own power. Weeks later, Freren kissed Ramira on the forehead, the two of them sitting at a table and enjoying a slice of cheesecake together. "You stupid girl," Freren laughed, looking down at Ramira's many bandages. "You just had to join in on the fight, didn't you?" Ramira shrugged as she stabbed at her cheesecake. "I couldn't just let them kill me, you know. A human gave me her rifle and I started using it." "Mother is going to kill you," Freren chuckled, brushing down her sister's brighter-colored yellow fur. "Look at what you did to your fur, getting holes all in it." "You're one to talk. Didn't they have to drag you out from under a pile of bodies?" Ramira quipped, poking her sister in her still freshly repaired ribs. "Mother wouldn't even recognize you." Freren giggled, then let out a sad sigh. "I can't believe our people didn't come." "Yeah, Ramirez said, her tail giving a sad wag.
Everyone else did. Even the Nimiki showed up in their second-hand skip ships.
Not everyone, Miss Rimiki said, sitting down across from them with her plate piled with 4 slices of cheesecake. The table was a little short and shifted as her thighs pressed against the bottom of it. The Zumra failed to make a proper appearance as well. Ramira hissed through her teeth.
Damn, Teach! What happened to you?
Miss Rimiki poked at her bandages, the damage having been hard to heal due to how tough her skin and scales were. Just a little shrapnel damage is all. Freren, congratulations on your promotion, by the way.
Ha! Thanks.
Freren mused, waving her hand.
Honestly, it's more work than I would like. I have to manage a whole bunch of whiny Yorple now.
I see, Miss Rimiki said with a soft smile. Then she leaned forward, resting on her elbows. I heard that even more Yorple are coming here for training. Are you ready? Freren sighed, stabbed a hunk of her cheesecake, and forked it into her mouth as she spoke around it.
Since when have people asked me if I'm ever ready for this bullshit?
Kaden, wrapped in as many bandages as Miss Rimiki, gave her surprised face a kiss on the cheek, then sat down next to her.
Come on now, it's the most fun.
Tintel knew you were messing around with a human!
Ramira suddenly screamed, pointing at Kaden as she jumped to her feet, causing both Freren, Kaden, and Miss Rimiki to startle.
She is going to flip! Tintel!
The black-furred Yorple looked over her shoulder lazily as she waited in line. Then her eyes went wide, pointing at Kaden and shouting across the restaurant.
I knew it!
I asked you to wait in the car, Miss Rimiki said with an aggravated tilt of her head towards her human lover. Kaden blew a raspberry.
Wait in the car outside a cheesecake place so you can visit with your students? Hello, this place is full of cheesecake and I'm full of painkillers. Let's feast.
I hope you enjoyed that story. Click right here to watch another video with the same characters.